Slenderbone, published by Gregor Daniels. "Watch out, you're gonna get slenderboned!" I ignored Alexia's ridicule for the moment, not at all sharing her concerns or beliefs in the existence of such a supernatural being. It was transformed kids' stories at most, a version of the familiar monster under the bed, only in the stories that were spread around town, the monster's motivations were more adult in nature. Whatever, I shrugged it off, staying close to my friend. As we walked through the campus, avoiding fast-moving bikes and keeping our jackets closed tightly into the chilly October air. "It's just some spooky story." "That's what they all say," Alexia laughed, "until they get to meet him. Then they aren't so sure of it." Whether the story of Slenderbone was true or not remained a mystery. Even if my friend believed in such fairy tales, I was apprehensive to recognize such a ridiculous story. The legend is the sort of tale that only those who believe in Santa would consider as truth. Slenderbone was a supernatural being, or just some disturbed man, I wasn't sure. The stories all differed on his appearance and nature, even given him special powers in some of the mentions. Regardless, most accounts depicted him as a really tall man, almost unnaturally so. Not only was he a head above most professional basketball players, but his arms were typically said to be inhumanly long, reaching down almost to his knees. Still, besides the strange detail, he was said to have the appearance of a man wearing a suit and tie. But by far the most creepy aspect of the folklore was the fact that he was described as not having a face. He had the skeletal structure of a human being for his head, but where a pair of eyes were completely sealed shut, no lips, no ears, no discernible features that humanized his presence. Slenderbone was, by all accounts, a figment of the imagination, a scary story for the girls in town to lose their virginity. As they all said, if a girl doesn't have sex before college, she was going to get a visit from the strange being that walked in the shadows and only appeared at night, when no one was around. They were going to get slenderboned. "That stuff sounds like glorified rape, Alex," I said. "Some man coming to take your virginity against your will? I can't believe in such stuff like that. Whoever he is, he needs to be put in jail for starting such a story." "And what makes you think that it was this one person who started a story?" My friend turned to me. "Hundreds of girls have seen him, Jamie. Outside of their shower, in the bushes at night, peering through the window. Slenderbone is more than just a legend." I merely snorted. "And besides, it's not my virginity we're talking about here. It's yours." We remained silent as we took the steps up to the Douglas Hall and up a flight of stairs for our next class, psychology. Just before the entrance to the classroom, I heard a couple of girls talking to one another. I should have ignored their voices as mixed background noise, but the subject of the conversation grabbed my attention. "I don't know, Becky," one of them said. "I think I saw him again last night, looking through my window." She was visibly distraught. "It's okay," the other soothed her fears. "He isn't going to harm you. He's merely there to warn you about what's coming." The other girl shook her head, perhaps not believing her friend. "No," she whimpered. "I don't want him to. It can't happen like this." I must have been standing too close listening in on their discussion because both of them turned and looked at me. "What do you want?" the girl that was apparently Becky asked me. I didn't respond, and headed into the classroom, thinking about what the distraught girl had said, but mostly blowing it off as my imagination getting the better of me. "Nice try," I said to Alexia as we sat down. "No matter what you do to get me to believe that crazy shit, I'm not going to." "What are you talking about now?" "Those girls," I said, pointing to the couple of classmates that had just entered. "Planting them there so that I would hear their conversation was smart on your part, but I'm still not going to believe it." "You're really not going to change your mind, are you?" Alexis asked. "I've been trying to warn you, Jamie, but if you don't accept the facts and find a boy soon, you'll see for yourself." "Oh yeah? And what's going to happen if I don't?" Alexia smiled and turned to face the instructor who had just entered and set down his things. "I don't even know those girls. I'm sure as hell didn't tell them to stand there talking." Action! Tom paced back and forth, pausing for a moment to look at Stacy before looking away and off into the distance. The clouds were accumulating on the horizon, perhaps a sign of rain with the shifting weather patterns and abrupt temperature changes. "I don't know," he sighed. "Everything is different now." He looked back at the girl who stood with him in the frame. "Please," she said, taking 2 steps closer as Alexia zoomed in on the couple. "Please stay just a little longer." Tom nuzzled against the girl for a brief moment before pulling away and turning from the camera. "It's just not the same. I don't know if we can be together." The blonde girl had a glimmer in her eye, perhaps the onset of tears forming on her bottom eyelids. It was an act that had made her a prime candidate for the part in the first place. "Stay," she begged, grabbing onto the shoulder of the male lead. "Just for tonight. I won't tell anyone." The sudden willingness of the girl had Tom considering second thoughts about leaving his love interest behind. "All right," he said, looking down into the eyes of his former crush. "Just for tonight." One of his hands pulled a few strands of hair from the girl's face. "Your eyes are so beautiful." Cut! Alexia pulled the viewfinder from her face, pressing the A on the side to stop the recording. "Not bad, Tom, and some great tears there, Stacy." The blonde girl nodded, wiping the liquid from her eyes. "All right, that's enough for today, Tom. You have my number, right?" Granite Wasps was a low-budget student film for Alexia, an assignment for one of her classes. The story was fairly basic, about a guy who goes off to college and returns home finding that things aren't as they used to be, and the former friend having become increasingly distant in his absence. The projected length is only about 40 minutes long, with Alexia doing most of the writing and directing. I've been helping on some of the shots, doing camera work and makeup whenever needed. The project has become somewhat loosely organized lately, with Alexia wanting to do shooting days less and less. This was the first time in 2 weeks that we worked on it. The actors and myself have had no problem working on it for free, but my friend seems to be becoming distracted in the project. Whether she's just tired with the story or legitimately too busy to show up on scheduled shoots, I have no idea. As the sun started to set, we packed up everything and stowed the camera and materials in the back of Alexia's car. The 2 leads were supposed to do a kiss during this encounter in the gazebo, but recent script changes have moved the scene to a different location. I asked Alexia what the title meant, and the movie just started to get into production. After all, Granite Wasps isn't something that I felt sparked interest to see the thing. It sounded like a generic monster movie. Indestructible wasps attacking a neighborhood or something. It was a joke, which Alexia didn't like very much, and promptly defended her decision on the title, saying that it felt like it was the right name for the movie. I didn't take it any further. On the way back, after dropping off Tom and Stacy, we were heading back to the university apartments. Alexia and I both lived in the same building, but on different floors. As childhood friends, we had anticipated to get the same room, and were disappointed when that wasn't the case. Now looking over at my friend, who was becoming increasingly pale as the night looked over us, the car's headlights illuminated the road ahead. I was recently feeling relieved. "What's wrong?" I asked, looking at the ghastly face of my friend behind the wheel, and the wide eyes which rarely blinked. Her arms visibly shivered. "It's just so cold," she muttered. "Well then turn on the heat, silly," I said, cranking the knob on the console and feeling the warmth coming through the vents. Alexia didn't say anything. It was something which had become increasingly common. Sometimes she seemed normal, like the cheery girl that I'd grown up with. On other occasions, like right now, she was distant and quiet, almost of a polar opposite of her usual self. With midterm tests coming up, I could understand the stress. Hell, I had an exam to study for when I got back to my room. But there was something else going on with Alexia. School tests didn't do this to a girl. She had a lot else on her mind. About a mile away from the campus, with eyes searching across into the blurred shapes of trees and signs that passed our car, I swore I saw something in the bushes, just off the side of the highway. Maybe my eyes were deceiving me, but it looked like a figure, a man standing along the tree line. I could barely make out his shoulders and arms in the moonlight, reflecting off of the black of his wardrobe. Regardless, it made him difficult to see. His head and lower body were obscured by shadows and branches, but I just ignored it as a trick of my eyes and wild imagination, seeing things that weren't actually there. When I looked back, twisting my head against the passenger side window and watching, my breath appeared on the cold glass. I couldn't see him anymore. "Did you see something?" Alexia asked, starting a conversation for the first time since we entered the car. Her voice was still soft and flat. "No," I shook my head. "I thought I did, but it must have been a tree or a branch or something." We didn't say anything else on the way back. "How did the shoot go?" "It was okay, I guess," I sighed. I don't think this movie's going to be very good, and Alexia's starting to lose interest in it, but we got some more done." "How much more do you have left?" "Oh," I pondered for a moment. "There's still the finale to do, which I have no idea where we're going to shoot at. We still have to do some college scenes with Tom and some old high school flashbacks. It won't be too long to finish, but with Alexia lately, I think it might be a couple of months yet." Jennifer pecked me on the cheek. "I was thinking about you all day today," she said as one of her hands grabbed at my chest. "I couldn't get you out of my mind during Mr. Johnson's class." Her palm squeezed at the flesh of my breasts, eliciting a low gasp from me. "And what were you thinking about?" "Oh, you know," she giggled, "how I was going to get you off tonight." Jennifer was more than just my roommate. She was my lesbian lover. Whether it was just a college experiment of my young adulthood or a completely new sexual orientation I was embracing, I just couldn't fight the feelings. After the first day living on campus, there was a strange connection between us, even more than just a typical companionship of two underclassmen with the same major. No, as I felt her lips on my cheek once more, Jennifer was more than that to me. "I still can't believe this is happening," she breathed into my ear. "My roommate, my lover." Likewise, I shared her sentiments, although I wasn't ready to be telling my parents just yet, or my friends for that matter. Lesbian relationships like this were seldom to last. Even if I did love the sex, I still had the lingering doubts that maybe this was just a strange fling of mine, a temporary state of mind in the strange new, open world of college. Or, as I felt her fingers down the front of my pajama pants, maybe I was coming around to girls. Permanently. "Oh, Jamie," she breathed. Her voice was just barely audible and soothing, causing my heart to race with desire. She kissed my forehead and touched my cheek again, bringing me in close to her lips, where we embraced for a moment. I shifted my body, moving in between her thighs to get closer to her. The way that Jennifer caressed me was unlike anything from a man, passionate and caring. I closed my eyes as her arms wrapped around me, enjoying the sensation. Whether this was Jennifer's first experience with a woman, I didn't know. She never told me about her previous engagements, and I didn't ask. Regardless, she had the allure of a girl who had done this before, and her lips moved down my body, under my chin and across my collarbone. I was grateful. I shuddered as we remained close together, goosebumps forming all along my limbs and torso within her arms. A deep, pleasurable knot started to radiate in my pelvis, causing me to gyrate involuntarily against my lover. Her touch was so erotic and loving, not at all rough and forceful, as her hand slid underneath the waistband of my pants and along the curve of my hip, teasing the region near my groin, but not being too greedy just yet. Each scrape of her nails against my sensitive skin sent thrills through my nimble body. "Oh," I sighed, shifting to allow her more access to my body. "You seem excited, more than usual," she smiled. I didn't utter a single sound except a moan that passed through my lips as her fingers grazed against the top cleft of my womanhood. Jennifer bent over and implanted her lips on my own one more time, easing her tongue in as her fingers penetrated my soft folds. As a few indiscernible noises echoed between us, she kept her lips against mine, with her tongue probing into my mouth as we rolled together, with her on top of me. I spread my legs, giving her plenty of access to the warmth of my crotch. Jennifer was a master seductress, knowing how to make my insides twist and turn uncontrollably. Her fingers tickled my labia, but didn't enter my warm hole just yet. I ran my fingers through her long, dark hair as we eagerly kissed, enjoying the sensation of her tongue dancing with my own. My back arched, and her fingers continued to tease me, just running along the outer lips of my moist snatch. "So wet already?" she whispered against me. It was true. There was something about this woman's touch that had me weak in the knees, trembling with desire and overcome with lust that couldn't be described. A man never turned me on like this, but Jennifer. Just the sight of her body and her incredible scent made me slick between my thighs. She pulled her lips away and smiled down at me, apparently enjoying the feeling of my waiting womanhood. Then I gasped as her fingers suddenly entered me, just nudging in between the tight lips and beckoning for attention. While my body writhed almost without my permission, I couldn't hold back the cries of pleasure that came out of my mouth. "Shh," she said, planting a finger against my lips, but hardly containing the sounds of passion that filled the room. "You don't want anyone to hear us, do you?" "Everyone can hear us for all I care." She didn't push her fingers in very far, but just enough to make me shudder noticeably, as her precise teasing kept me on edge, fidgeting and struggling under her weight. Then, with part of her hand still nestled between my warm lips, I felt her thumb against my clit, pushing it side to side and making me gasp out loud once more, while still flickering at the hardened ball of the nerves. The rest of her hand went to work, slowly pumping out of my snatch and pushing in a little deeper, a little harder. "You look so beautiful," she cooed, kissing me on the lips again, "so angelic laying there." I wanted to return the compliment, but my current situation prevented me from doing so. Suddenly her hand pushed into me all the way to the knuckle, and the sudden entry caused me to spasm and shake and moan even louder than before, even though my quivering muscles said otherwise. I spread my legs just a little farther as her fingers rolled around inside of me, deep in the walls of my womanhood. "That's a girl," she smiled, looking at me deep in the eyes whenever I wasn't shutting them. I was a sweaty mess by now, drenched in perspiration that beaded along my forehead and inside my pajama top as it clung to my body. Combined with the aroma of sex in the room, I'm sure I was a wet, smelly mess at the moment. She was using 2 fingers now as my pelvis humped without my consent against her invading digits. She was fucking me slowly, deliberately, like a predator systematically hunting its prey, positioning itself for the final attack. For a moment, Jennifer let me catch my breath, pulling her hand from my pants and smelling the honey that covered her fingers, which glistened in the light. But the break didn't last long, and soon she was back at it, tweaking my clit and fingering my cunt with the enthusiasm of a horny young woman. My head was in a blender of pleasure and other sensations that I couldn't comprehend. This was more than just a quick fuck to get me off tonight. This was something deeper in the way that she seduced me and worked my body over. She was calculating and restraining, but filled with lust just as much as I was. I could see it in her eyes whenever she looked upon my body and stared into my own restless gazes. This was a seduction between 2 lovers. "Oh God!" I moaned, feeling her fingers continue inside of me, turning my pussy into a mess of raw and tender flesh. I wanted to return the favor, to see her young, naked body in all of its glory, but Jennifer had me at a disadvantage. She was being the dominating self at this moment, and I was starting to think that this was all her intention. She just wanted to see me get off. At that moment, feeling her stares against my shaking body, like a voyeuristic girl spying on her naughty roommate, I was hotter than ever inside. Finally, as my entire body ached from muscle contractions, and my lover's fingers hit a sweet spot in my groin, I felt a dam burst inside of my loins. My torso convulsed, and I screamed aloud as my incredible orgasm hit my entire body. I'm coming, I screamed, as my hips thrust into the air and off Jennifer's fingers, which still remained inside of me. She was relentless, keeping me on edge, and I held my breath as each surge of pleasure was greater than the last, pulling me on the verge of passing out had it not been for the constant barrage of subsequent orgasms. At last, when my body could no longer take another violent spasm, Jennifer's fingers slipped out of me, and I collapsed against the mattress, gasping for breath and wiping the hair out of my eyes. It was then, beneath my lover's weight, that I realized in a soft warmth of the afterglow which spread throughout my limbs and core, calming my rapidly beating heart into a more manageable pace, the aroma of my sex now filled the room completely, leaving a distinct residue of the activities that occurred just minutes before. When I mustered enough energy to look up to my partner, I saw that she was busy sucking on her fingers, apparently licking the sweet release of my intimate folds. "You taste so good this evening," she said, offering her slickened fingers to me, which I happily sucked on. We snuggled close, our warm bodies grinding together deeper into the night, as the sounds of students outside our room became a long silence of an empty hallway. I never remembered being so comfortable and so relaxed before, but in the arms of my girlfriend, who held me tight against her body, I was quickly on the edge of falling into a deep sleep. We looked into each other's eyes for what seemed like an eternity, not saying a word, just taking in the moment. "We have to tell somebody at some point," she whispered. "We can't keep this a secret forever." Jennifer was right. Even if I didn't want to admit it, and various options ran through my head on how to accomplish this. "I don't want to," I responded, remembering how conservative my family was and how Alexia might handle me coming out to her. Regardless, with her visiting on some occasion, she was bound to find out anyway, whether by accident or intent. "We can keep it a secret forever," I whispered, still believing my ignorance to be true. Jennifer giggled, kneading at my breast some more as we laid there. "Have you ever been with a man before?" It was an odd question, and certainly out of the blue, but not insulting, and I simply shook my head. Although I had been close a few times, Jennifer had been my first true guide into the world of sex, and this was the 4th or 5th time that we'd made love. Since then, she had never asked whether I had a previous relationship. Then, the strangest expression passed through my lover's face. A sign of worry and dread. Like my answer had somehow frightened her, but then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, and we were snuggling once more. "It'll be okay," she said. The rest of the week flew by, and Jennifer seemed distant from me. On a school night, even a couple of days after our intimate encounter, I tried to entice her into another erotic moment together, but she seemed disinterested and worried about other things. She claimed that she had schoolwork to do, but I never saw her pick up a pencil or even read a textbook that night. It may have been that time of the month, so I didn't think too much about it. I was having my own second thoughts about the relationship, wondering if this was truly what I wanted, and how the ramifications would affect my family life and closeness with other friends. As the weekend neared, I kept trying to call Alexia, but she never answered her phone or responded to texts. I feared that the girl may have forgotten to pay her phone bill recently, and I desperately wanted to try and get that movie finished as soon as possible. I know the actors were getting agitated by the director's sporadic appearances and changing of personalities. It was a quiet Saturday night when my phone buzzed. Jennifer was gone for the night, and with no homework to do, I was relegated to the computer screen, browsing the internet, and the sudden ringing nearby made me jump out of my chair, and I looked at the front to see who was calling. It was Alexia. "Hello?" I asked, putting the receiver to my ear. Silence. Only a distant crackling of static every few seconds, as if the phone was being moved around. "Hello?" I asked again. No answer. As I was about to put the phone away, I heard a voice on the other side. Female, barely audible. It was Alexia. "What's going on?" "Jamie," the voice said, hardly louder than a whisper. "Jamie, I need you to meet me at the park." "At this time of night? Oh, are we finishing the movie?" I started to grab my things and slip on my shoes when the phone still pressed against my ear. "No." "Then what is it, Alexia?" There was a long, drawn-out moment before I heard her voice again. Please meet me at the park." She sounded distraught and worried, perhaps on the verge of tears, and before I could say anything else, the line was dead. And I grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. The clock on the dash was well past 11 at night when I arrived at the deserted place, a park just on the edge of town. It was a fairly unremarkable landmark of the community, with a few paths throughout the wooded area, picnic tables or families, and a small playground. Alexia was already waiting for me as I got out of the car, holding a black jacket tight around her body. "Jamie," she said, coming closer to me, "there's something I need to show you." For a moment, I thought that the girl had to have gone mad, or maybe she was just up to some devilish joke to scare me out of the middle of the night. Perhaps she was going to prank me with that Slenderbone crap again. "What is it? Couldn't it wait until tomorrow?" Alexia shook her head and started to walk towards the wooded area of the park. "Where are you going?" "This way," she responded. It was blistering cold out here, much more than the center of campus. I found myself wrapping my arms around my body, shivering as I attempted to warm up my torso. The neckline of my sweater didn't come high enough to protect my face, as sharp gusts of wind stung my cheeks. I looked at the girl walking next to me, who appeared to be moving with the pace of a drone more than a human being, emotionless and without any sort of character that I would come to expect from her. "Won't you tell me what's going on?" I asked again. "Not much longer now." While the moonlight offered some sort of luminescence to the dark sky, the high branches and leaves of the forested area prevented that from being any sort of help. Now it was darker than ever, with only an occasional street lamp next to a park bench to guide us along the sidewalk. "Look," I said, "if you're trying to scare me or something, just forget it. I don't believe in your Slenderbone stories, and I never will." While I turned to continue walking next to my friend, I heard a deep, raspy laugh coming from her mouth. "That's just the thing," she smiled, with piercing white eyes that seemed to glow without the help of any sort of light around us. "It's your turn." "For God's sake, Alexia, what are you talking about?" I stopped. "What? You don't think having sex with another girl would get you off the hook?" "Jesus! Look, is that what this is about? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to keep it from you. It's just that I can feel him." She cut me off. "He's close. Listen to me. Yes, Jennifer and I have been together for a while. I was going to tell you when it seemed right to do so. He's watching us now." I wanted to say more to her, but something stopped me. It was as if there was a pair of eyes watching us from the tree line, and suddenly I felt open and vulnerable, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, and goosebumps formed all along my arms, filling the gaps between the ones that were already there from the winter cold. "I'm sorry it's come to this," Alexia said, looking me in the eye, "but like any other girl, you had your chance." "God, will you stop talking like you're crazy? If this is one of your spooky tales to scare me with, I told you, I'm not falling for it." "Like I said," she started, her eyes focusing on something behind me, "it's not a tale." Perhaps it was the bright white of her eyeballs, or the distinct feeling of something standing behind me, but with shaking limbs and deep breaths, I turned on toes that struggled for balance. Amongst the row of new dark shadows in the outline of trees beyond the sidewalk, I saw nothing but the movement of branches and the dancing moon behind swaying leaves. My eyes darted between the tree trunks, scouring the horizon for movement. It was too dark to make out anything, and for as long as I squinted into the distance, I still felt like someone was watching us. Then something grabbed my attention off to the right, and just beyond the concrete path, I saw a shape moving behind the trees, gliding along the shadows. It was slow as I watched it, a towering figure of inhuman heights, but truly organic, and not a fixture of the surrounding environment. With each pass out into the open, I saw a hint of his body, like part of the arm or the shoulder, just before he disappeared behind a tree and never came out from the other side. The figure was much too large to hide behind the trunk, so it was as if he simply vanished. "Did you see that?" I turned, expecting to find Alexia standing behind me. Only there was nobody around the path. It was empty as far as I could see. "Alex?" I cried out, cupping my shivering hands around my mouth to amplify the sound. Only after a few yells I heard nothing of any sort of response. God damn it! As I frantically looked for my friend in the wavering darkness and looming shadows of the park, I felt an increasing need to turn around, as if someone or something was right behind me. It was that feeling, like being chased in a dream, with a predator right on my heels, only no matter how hard I tried and how fast I ran, I could never get away. But as far as I could tell, this wasn't a dream. He was human in proportion, but far above any man that I had ever seen before. It took me a moment to differentiate him from the backdrop of trees and limbs, but once my eyes focused on the gargantuan figure that stood on the sidewalk, not more than 20 feet away, I screamed and turned to run. As soon as my body rotated to bolt down the path, I ran into something standing between me and an escape. My head slammed into something hard, and I stumbled backwards, landing on my ass on the cold concrete. For a moment, I still feared the thing behind me, and I hurried, prepared to stand up and run. Except he had already caught up, and was standing just inches in front of me. Jesus Christ! What the fuck? He was a man, as much as the devil himself could look like a human being. He wasn't really a man, more than his general appearance pretended to be. Suddenly, I felt a piercing headache, like a drill was forcing itself into my scalp, grinding against the very bone that kept my brain intact. The streetlight next to me flickered as the figure appeared and disappeared into the overwhelming darkness with each flash. "No," I panicked. "No!" I screamed. "You can't be real!" Through the pulsing pain surging through my head, and with blurry eyes, I traced his figure, standing over me by what seemed to be the height of a small house. He was wearing a suit, like a businessman, perfectly framed for his incredible body and inhuman proportion for a man of his stature. Even though he wore something that a man might have adorned, that's where the similarities stopped. I looked up into his face, desperate to see the eyes of my attacker as I slowly crawled backwards, dragging my body along the path. This man, no, this creature, had nothing of the sort. No mouth, no eyes, no discernible features on his face, except a skeletal structure of a human being. There were no openings to breathe, and none to see with. I screamed as loud as I could, straining my voice as an arm reached out to grab me, an alien-like appendage that must have been as long as I was tall. When his fingertips touched my head, I instantly stopped moving, completely halting my body on the earth beneath him. From the moment his flesh and bone were near my face, a strange scent entered my nostrils. It was something that frightened the very core of my body and scared the last remaining wisps of courage that remained. Death. "No!" I panted, my voice giving in to some invisible force that encapsulated my entire body, chilling the bones in my legs and freezing my arms at their sides, preventing them from diverting the intruder's grasp upon my head. It was as if my body was giving in to his intentions, relaxing for whatever came next. Slenderbone. He was a creature that dominated the crest of my wildest imaginations, something which I never believed to be as real as the cold gusts of air upon my body, or the hardness of the pathway beneath my rear. Now I was questioning my own perception of reality, wondering if this was a figment of my imagination or the worst encounter that a young woman could ever wish to be true. There was no pulse in his hand, as his pale fingertips glided along my cheek and underneath my chin. No hints that this man was truly a living animal, or just a representation of hell itself. Maybe he was a demon coming to take my soul from the underworld, punishing me for my sins. Each time his long, pale digits scraped against my skin, I felt a spark between his hand and my body, and the fears that swept through my mind were erasing with each passing second. It was like this creature had some sort of hypnotic trance, like a supernatural tranquilizer passing through my body. In just a few moments, the incredible fear and anxiety washed away into relaxation. and calming. I could still feel my consciousness deep down inside me, but it was buried beneath a pile of forced emotions, like a dam keeping my will to escape trapped far down below. I knew that I wanted to run for my life, to never look back behind me. Only the will to do so never passed into the legs and arms. Only the will to do so never passed into my legs and arms. I was merely a slave to his touch, a submissive partner as his next victim. As I watched below, his fingers moved down farther to the front of my chest, where it encountered my hidden bosom. It paused and started to feel and grasp at the flesh beneath my sweater. For the first time, I got a clear look at his hands. They were long and spindly, nearly twice the length of my own and equally bigger, with a palm that could crush my skull if he willed it to. Only the hand that touched my chilled body were not of the sort of a killer or murderer. These were gentle, soothing, strangely warm, even if unshielded to the blistering cold of our surroundings. It was as if there was a radiating heat within him, a fire burning so hot that even the coldest winds could not douse it. It was a small detail which made me shudder with his touch against my breasts. It wasn't because of fear, but of arousal. In one quick swoop, Slenderbone's hand was down the front of my sweater and busy caressing my bosom, which had slowed considerably from a frantic heaving just minutes before. I felt his fingertips push beneath the cups of my bra, squeezing at the flesh that filled the undergarment and focusing on my nipples. They quickly became hard as they were touched and tweaked, sending sparks all along my body. "No!" I squeaked out one last time, feeling my mind fight for its right to exist behind a burden of new emotions. No longer was I fighting for my own survival or struggling to flee this hellish place. No, as my arms relaxed and my legs spread open ever so slightly, I was welcoming it. With one more tweak of my sensitive flesh, a moan escaped my lips. Perhaps I was truly under a spell now, or fighting just plain madness, but I didn't regret it. I followed it up with another, and then another even louder than the first two. His hand had expert precision, grabbing and pinching the swollen tissue with the experience of a lover who knew how to appease a girl's arousal, and then some. When I was too concentrated on the sensation coming from my chest, I barely recognized my pants being unbuttoned by another hand snaking its way down the front of my jeans. It was so slow and calculated that I jumped whenever I felt a finger pull aside the waistband of my panties and graze against my moist, intimate region. Deep down, a part of me knew that I should be scared for my life in this situation, fighting for my dignity and defending against a creature whose intention was nothing more than having sex with me. But those worries were hidden deep behind the squeals of pleasure coming from my mouth and echoing in the dense woods. I looked into his face in the dark recesses of shadows where his eyes would have been if he had a pair. I wondered how he could see like this, or how Slenderbone knew where he was, at least, or what he was doing. "Oh God!" I moaned, biting my lip. Given his absurd presence and abilities, there was a definite supernatural spark to his existence. Even with the otherworldly figure and impressive stature, he knew what he was doing. Without the sense to see or even breathe, it appeared his methods were well memorized and excruciatingly complex, although sensual and experienced. It barely crossed my mind that this was perhaps not his first time. I was bucking my hips now, involuntarily meeting the advances of his fingers against my warm snatch. He had started slow, just teasing the outer folds of my lower lips and touching the sensitive skin just near my clit, as Jennifer had many times. Then, as my pleasure peaked to a new height, he plunged a finger deep into my darkest recess of my anatomy, causing me to quiver with carnal desire and literally shake in overwhelming sensations. Even experiencing sex with my girlfriend numerous times, some bringing me to shattering orgasms, this was different in every way. With one quick jerk, his entire hand was down between my legs, with a couple of fingers penetrating my moist folds, pumping in and out as my heart raced. My screams sent a flock of birds scattering into the distance, flying away as a girl cried out in pure lust. My pussy was so tight, barely stretching to accommodate his incredible fingers. Even as they pushed in and out of me, the inner walls felt as if they were stretched to the limit, causing a hint of pain deep in my loins that were only masked by incredible pleasure. Suddenly, I felt myself move off the ground. For a moment, I thought the supernatural being had lifted me with his arms, but there was still a hand down in the front of my bra, pinching my nipples, which were damn near raw. The other was still busy fingering my womanhood. Rather, I was levitating off the earth itself, floating up into the air a few feet as he continued to please my aching body. I looked down at my side, seeing the concrete far beneath my floating shoulders, and my hair flying in the breeze that passed underneath my back. Slenderbone walked next to me as I glided off to the side of the path, into the dark shadows and blackness of the forest around us. Through all of this, as since this encounter started, I felt nothing but deep relaxation. While my heart pumped furiously within my writhing body, shaking during each touch down below or caress of my breast, I still felt at ease. Not long into the wooded area we stopped, and I watched as my pants were pulled down by some invisible force, discarded into the grass below. The figure still had his hand down my pants, and they traveled down my legs like the pair of underwear were alive as well, clearing my feet and falling to the earth beneath us. With my sheer lower nudity, I should have been freezing with the chilled air hitting my body, but it was nothing of the sort. Rather, a warm cocoon shrouded my body, protecting it in a soothing warmth that filled every crevice and fold of my shuddering form. Just above, I stared into the dark abyss of the night sky, watching as the stars glimmered behind the trees, dancing and disappearing with each second. Then, as my legs were spread and the body of my captor moved in closer, I felt something pressed against the groin of my soaking snatch. I didn't need to look to see what it was, but instead, I knew, by the instant the head pressed against my opening. Whether it was by the touch of Slenderbone's hand against me, or some other dark power between us, I knew his intentions right then, in the middle of the trees, in the darkness that separated us from the outside world. Yet I wasn't afraid. A whimper escaped my lips as he gently forced the folds apart, and my whole body jerked suddenly as his cock entered me, pushing into the deep recesses of my burning pussy. The act was so gradual and smooth that I felt not a thing from my deflowering. I cried out again as his long fingers encircled my quivering thighs, taking me with long, deep strokes. While I was accustomed to sex and the use of toys, I had never felt anything like this. To have a man's dick inside of me was something else entirely, even if that man was nothing but a shade of humanity in form only. Nonetheless, his cock felt as every bit as real as the ones I had seen, thrusting into my glistening folds, effortlessly as if it was the perfect size. "Jesus!" I cried out, just as the tall, dark figure between my legs barely illuminated. A shudder raced through me as he picked up the pace, pumping into my body with each rhythmic force that caused every limb to tingle. Through the deep dizziness and overwhelming pleasure that clouded my mind, I tried to focus on the being that was taking my virginity. "What are you?" I trailed off before feeling another surge pass through my body, causing my midsection to arch and my toes to curl. While my partner had no mouth to respond with, I felt a sort of response through his touch against my skin. Images flashed through my mind. They were undecipherable at first, a grand puzzle of mixed colors and emotions, until finally, the last spark unlocked everything. Slenderbone was a creature not of this world, and his origins I could not comprehend, but he made clear to me that his single, unifying purpose on this planet was to take the virginity of young women, the very story that I had heard and chosen to ignore many times over. I have been pondering the flashes in my mind more. I would have pondered the flashes in my head more had it not been for my current predicament, his cock burrowing itself inside of me. "Oh," I panted, my whole body vibrating with each push of his groin as his manhood continued to stretch my inner walls. Time seemed to freeze as I briefly looked into the face of my partner. This being of sexual energy, In the darkness, I completely forgot about everything that was happening and simply stared to the dark ridges and contours of his face and structure. He had the bone formations for eyebrows, the ridge of a nose, although his face lacked any sort of hair or blemish. The area of his nostrils were sealed off completely, entirely smooth and devoid of any indentation. Likewise, he had not a single slit for his mouth, or a hint of lips, or that an opening existed. It was as if this was a man wearing a pair of pantyhose over his head, completely smoothing over his features. Only his skin tone was the same pale as the rest of his flesh, a faded gray with a bare hint of tan. He towered over me, standing alike the trees that surrounded us, a tall, lanky figure, and then I looked down past the tops of my heaving chest and crest of my stomach between my legs. I could not make out his maleness from this angle, but what I could see was his naked groin pushing deep between my thighs. "Jesus!" I screamed, flailing around at anything to grab onto. A branch, post, anything to support my body, as an incredible pleasure spread through my core. My overwhelming anxiety had transformed into a deep frenzy of need for release. As the fire began to burn hotter than ever inside of my abdomen, the very act of being fucked by this supernatural creature seemed to last an eternity. Hours went by. It felt even days with him pounding away inside of me. It had continued on for so long that I feared my head would no longer remember who I was. Then, as I stared into the full moon, long away in the night sky, it finally happened. A sudden surge made my body convulse into the beginning of an orgasm. "Oh my God! Oh shit!" I cried out, writhing in the air, twisting and turning as my body exploded into a mind-numbing climax. Juices seeped out from my snatch and onto the soil below. Slenderbone must have been close too, or maybe it was just a command of will, but he soon followed. I felt his seed shoot into the dark corners of my womanhood, coating the inner walls with his warm release. Spurt after spurt erupted from his cock, until I felt him soften and slip out of me. "Jamie?" I heard a noise far off in the distance. It sounded like the wind howling, rustling through the branches and leaves, which caused a racket of sounds. Then the footsteps on the earth caught my attention, the crunching of leaves and bushes, of someone moving through the underbrush. "Jamie!" As my mind cleared from the peak of climax, I realized it to be a person's voice, whether male or female I could not tell. I looked down, seeing the ground well beneath my floating form, and then I turned, staring once more between my legs, or rather the absence where the being of my virgin desire stood, not seconds before. "Jamie!" As if he had vanished completely, there was nothing but a definite absence between my thighs, a lingering space where the creature once stood. I could only feel the heat of his short presence still surrounding my body in a comfortable warmth. "Jamie!" I woke to the dawn of a new day, and to the glimmering smile of a person standing over me. "Oh my God, Jamie, did you get drunk last night or something?" My eyes searched around looking for the forest or the darkness of the night that seemed to be a reality just moments before. Instead, all I saw was the familiar room of my dormitory and the scantily clothed female figure of my roommate. I muttered, coughing and wiping the dried saliva from the corners of my mouth. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" I looked to the window, seeing the bright sunlight through the cracked blinds. Must have been past lunchtime by now, well into the Sunday afternoon. "What happened?" Jennifer giggled. "What do you mean? I left to go to church and came back and you were still asleep. I remember you being gone last night, and from the looks of things, you had one hell of a party." "God," I sighed, slumping into the pillows once more and staring into the ceiling. "I feel like I haven't slept all night." My girlfriend snorted. "Well, I was hoping that we could have some fun today." I looked over to her, twirling a lock of her hair. "You know, like we usually do." She smiled. While I was fond of the intimate encounters with my girlfriend, especially on a lonely weekend, there were other things on my mind. At that moment, crazy, unimaginable things of a dream or a twisted reality. I wasn't quite sure which. I'm not feeling it right now, babe, I said, to which my roommate sighed. I hadn't meant to ruin her appetite for sex at the moment, but I just wasn't feeling up to it. Maybe later, she giggled, showing a hint of her cleavage as she bent over. These babies can be all yours. And then she was gone, off to study or hang with her friends. I was alone to my thoughts, for the moment, reveling in the mystery of last night. As I got up from my tired slump, the door opened and Jennifer returned again. This time, she had a box in her hands. Here's something. I think it's for you, she said, appearing puzzled by the blank nature of the box. It was left by the door. Oh, I gasped, taking the delivery from her hands. I forgot. Alexia wanted me to do some things editing this weekend and get some of the movie cut for her. Not a lot of weekend left to do much, don't you think? Jennifer laughed. Yeah, I sighed, as the very mention of my friend's name brought up negative images in my head, specifically of last night. Have fun, then, my girlfriend said before exiting the door a second time. Yawning one last time, I got up and headed for my computer desk, grabbing a pair of scissors from the drawer. I also realized that my appearance had changed completely from when I remembered last night. I was wearing a typical nightshirt and a pair of pajama pants like I normally wore before bed. I must have changed before going to sleep last night, but the memory of doing so simply wasn't there. Inside the box was a mass amount of filming tapes, all from Alexia's camcorder. Given the amount of footage that we had shot, I expected there to be at least 10 or 15, but that number was a big underestimate. 50, I counted, on the first search, even finding more buried down below after more thorough count. How had she amassed so many? Each tape held a couple hours of footage, so the sheer amount of video in this box would be astronomical. Way more than she had held in the camera. After I started to take the tapes out, setting them aside in an orderly fashion, I realized there was more than one type. Some had the dates and locations written on the side, from where they had filmed on the day and who was on the footage, and others were blank except for a number, hastily written in black ink. As I set the movie tapes to the side, I left the other remnants in the box. Each one of them had a numerical indicator on the side, as if there was a certain order for them to be played. Maybe Alexia had filmed extra footage to be in the movie. It wouldn't be the first time that she had done something without permission, such as changing an actress in between days and causing us to reshoot stuff. But I couldn't comprehend her shooting this much by herself. Where did she find the time to produce all this? Regardless, if it didn't have to be about the movie, then she probably wouldn't have sent them to me at all. Sighing heavily at the work ahead of me, I gathered the tapes with the dates and set them near the computer, while the box of the rest of unidentified tapes I laid near the television. After putting on a modest pair of clothes, I set to work on sorting through the mess of tapes in the box. Each one of them had a strange residue encrusted on the surface, like they were sitting there for a while. As I fumbled with them in my hands, some more checks for scratches and other weird markings, they also started to emit a strange odor. It took me a moment to recognize the stench that came from the objects, but as soon as it started to bring up memories from last night, I immediately connected it with one very specific being. I don't know how long I sat there, contemplating what to do next. The tape in my hand was the first in the series marked by a 1 on the side of the plastic. Finally, gathering a formidable amount of courage, I hooked the camera up to the television and pushed the first tape into the slot. Here goes nothing,